The European Union officials are hoping that a post-Brexit trade deal could finally be clinched this weekend. London, however, insists that negotiations are still very difficult, but it's determined to take back control from the bloc it left 10 months ago. At the same time, France has threatened to veto a bad deal. European Council President Charles Michel says that the United Kingdom has choices to make over the final stalling points, whilst British ministers insist that the EU must recognise UK's sovereignty.
British and EU negotiators need to find a compromise on the most persistent sticking points in their talks to protect $1 trillion worth of annual trade from possible tariffs and quotas in 4 weeks' time, when the UK's transition out of the bloc ends. Some of the outstanding issues are about fixing minimum labour, environment and social production standards, as well as corporate subsidies or state aid, so that firms from one side cannot sell substandard goods on the other one's market. The EU wants to lock Britain as closely as possible into its own regulations. But London rejects that because the ability to shape the UK's own laws independently was one of Brexit's chief promises. Specifically, the two sides are at odds over the non-regression clause, a provision that would not allow either to backpedal on a certain minimum level of standards once they reached them independently. Another sticking point is that of fisheries. London insists on annual catch negotiations under the principle of zonal attachment, but the EU demands a longer-term perspective for its fishing industry and more specific numerical targets for some 100 species under discussions. Britain also wants a separate agreement on fisheries, while the EU insists it must be part of any wider free trade deal. The UK will leave the EU on December 31st, but officials want at least a month to implement changes and approve the deals in EU and UK Parliament.
Business journalist Guy Shone is the Chief Executive Officer of market research firm Explain the Market. He joins us now via Skype from the UK. Thanks so much indeed, Guy. Good to talk to you again. You know, we've been talking about Brexit for some time, and we've seen these deadlines come and go, and somehow we never really get over the line with anything. And they've had a whole year knowing December 31 was coming. How close or how far are we from a no-deal Brexit?
Peter, unfortunately, although you're right, you know, we've been getting used, haven't we, to the almost endless stream of declarations that, you know, time is running out and, you know, we need a deal now, otherwise it may not happen. And today has been no different to that. We've seen the sort of endless list of sort of press release terminology coming out about significant divergences. You know, time is running out. Both sides are committed, apparently, to doing a deal. But it's been a very frosty day in every sense in London today. And still, you know, we have no deal coming out. Now, the deadline is the 31st of December before we automatically go into a no-deal situation. But there are also other ratifications which need to take place too, both in the UK and the EU. So we really are right up against it now. And it's unsurprising that sources, I have to say unnamed sources, on both sides have been briefing tonight that they expect negotiations to continue in the hope that at some point over the weekend, we will finally get that deal.
What is a deal going to look like that's going to be acceptable to both sides? I mean, France is already waving a flag saying, listen, we're not going to put up with just anything here.
Part of the problem with this, Peter, is that to some degree, you could argue this was always going to come down to the 11th hour. that it was only really at that final point, in those final few weeks, that the pressure would enable, hopefully, both sides to cut through these stalemate situations, these sticking points, because they're a mixture, an unhelpful mixture of some practical details and also some incredibly important ideological, emotive, political issues too. Now, if you look at the sticking points, I mean, fishing is a great example, a market on its own that doesn't look that huge in economic terms, but it is a hugely symbolic issue, particularly in the UK, that's surrounded by so much coastline. And the Brexit campaign, the campaign that was successful, that caused Brexit to happen in the first place, they made a big play out of this idea of foreign vessels coming into our waters to take away our fish. So politically, this is very difficult for the UK government to back down on. So we've got that uncomfortable mixture of hard details that are hard to hammer out, and then these big emotional topics too. So most people are not surprised it's come down to the 11th hour, but it really is balanced on a knife edge now as to whether we're going to get a deal or not.
And if they can't thrash it out, which they've shown for a year that they really struggle to agree on anything, what will happen? I mean, will we for sure see a no-deal Brexit?
Yes, I mean there are a number of things that, frankly, Peter, are going to change anyway, whether we get a deal or not. There's no longer going to be this automatic right for people to live and work and retire between the UK and the EU. The UK is obviously going to stop making its big annual payment to the EU budget. There's going to be additional bureaucracy and paperwork for businesses trading between both sides. And the UK is going to apply its new points-based immigration system for EU citizens. So there's already going to be change that's going to cause disruption, change that's going to be hard to adjust to. That's without additional tariffs, taxes being applied to goods in the event of a no deal. So, at a time when we're all emerging from the COVID crisis, hoping to get our economies revitalized again, we're about to crash into a bit of an economic brick wall as we try and sort of put the pieces of this jigsaw together as to what the UK-EU relationship's actually going to look like next year.
All right, so what's at stake for Europe in this? I mean, they're a big body, lots of G7 countries still in the mix there. What's really in it for them to get a deal out of this? Because it seems to me, and perhaps because I'm an outsider looking in, Britain has a lot more to lose, perhaps, by going it alone.
Well, I think it would be reasonable to argue that case. But the problem is because everything is so interlinked, you've had so many decades of the UK being part of the EU, that, the list of all of the things, all of the business relationships, all of the scientific, academic relationships, intelligence sharing relationships that are very, very tightly bound together in all sorts of different ways would be a very, very long list indeed. So it's going to be incredibly painful to uncouple that regardless for both sides. The UK is also a very large economy, one of the top 10 economies on the planet. It's also got quite a considerable degree of political influence around the world too. So there's no doubt that this is going to hurt the EU. You could argue it's going to hurt the UK more. But then you have a political will inside the UK that certainly at the time of the referendum was very strongly wanting, or at least a significant portion of the population was wanting to leave, and that's something that hasn't been seen in the main EU bloc. So very, very difficult for both sides. There's not so much of an advantage on the EU side that they can just really bluff too strongly in this negotiation. Certainly not at this critical stage.
Are political careers in the balance on the result of this? I mean, could this be Boris Johnson struggling to get re-elected at the next elections if they bungle this?
I mean, Peter, this is a big part of how Johnson came to power in the first place was, not being seen as being the most Eurosceptic member of the Conservative Party before Brexit. And certainly then, I think, mobilised a lot of support by associating himself very strongly with the Brexit cause. And, a lot of the reason of his re-election were concerns that were seen to be inextricably linked to Brexit, like immigration, like a sense of national sovereignty, all of these things Boris Johnson has used. Now, if he doesn't get a deal which looks good for Britain at a time when we're all pretty precariously balanced from an economic and trade point of view, then I think already those cracks that are starting to show in his administration that have been really pushed to the limit by managing the COVID crisis, well, they could become much bigger, and life politically for Boris Johnson could become very, very difficult indeed.
All right. Imagine you're a bookie for a couple of seconds, and I'm saying to you, what are the odds that some kind of a deal will happen before the end of the year?
Peter, you've done it there with the some kind of. That I think is absolutely key in all of this. Let's not forget, we're talking about politicians, career politicians, career diplomats, whose whole life is thinking about how to negotiate and critically how to spin this to the rest of the world. So I think the chances of there being no kind of a deal whatsoever are pretty slim. I think you'll be able to argue the toss about whether something is really an extension but's described as a deal, something that's, there'll be all sorts of great opportunities to chat more about not just the contents of what's agreed, but also the wordsmithing and brinkmanship around it.
All right, political games afoot then. Guy Shone, thanks very much indeed. Always great talking to you and getting your insights. Thanks so much for your time. All right, that's Guy Shone speaking to us from the UK. Yeah, no deal Brexit looms large in the United Kingdom as they negotiate with the European Union. The UK leaving the EU on the 1st of January.